before I hit record. So you just want to start it with just like why you started and all that? We'll do like an intro and then just go from there.
I'm gonna ask you that question.
Oh, yeah,
So
question. Oh, okay.
yeah.
All right. Do you want to do any sort of intro or anything, or just
Well, welcome to the Irreverent Sensei.
Okay. All right.
So
start that and we'll
yeah. I think people will understand what we're trying to do. You know, like they should probably go back and watch the intro. So so here's the question I have for you.
Okay.
So you started karate as when you were a kid.
Yep.
And what made you first start karate, and then what made you stay involved in it, and what has now you've been doing martial arts for a long time, so what keeps you in the game? Why do you continue to study?
Okay.
Has your original reason changed over the years?
Okay. So all right. So there's a lot to that question.
There's a lot.
So
it's really kind of important because I think a lot of people don't ever think about stuff like this, and so what they end up doing is they end up quitting.
Yeah. So all right. So let me see. I'll start at the beginning of that question. So yeah, I started like you when I was like 13, 14, somewhere around there. I think I started because back then in the time, like the way a lot of kids did, Chuck Norris movies were big, Bruce Lee movies were out, the Kung Fu movies were on TV and stuff like that. So just kind of interested in it. I was a big like sci-fi geek, so I always like the sci-fi heroes that were always, win the fight and get the girl and all that. So I think it's weird because I don't remember a specific point in time asking my parents to study martial arts, but somehow it must have happened. And coincidentally, we had a neighbor that I guess started studying at the school, John's school down in Woburn, Mass back then. So I mean, I got into it basically just because as a kid, it was kind of around. There was exposure to it, and it seemed cool. And I think my parents too at the time figured, oh, it's probably a good thing for him to do, so that he'll, probably for like the same reason all parents, like, oh, he'll be more confident, he'll be able to defend himself, he'll be all that. I took to it right away because for me, as a shy, geeky kid, hard to believe that now because you see like what I am now. But yeah, I was a shy, geeky kid. The like sports teams and all that, it's not that I didn't like them, but it was tough because I mean, you had to be good enough to be on the team, you had to be good enough to be on. And for me, it was always tough because if I didn't do well on a sports team, then I let the team down. And that was really tough for me. When doing martial arts, it was one of those things, I think from the beginning, I just kind of latched on to the fact that I didn't need to be as good as the black belts, and they didn't expect me to be that good. They just expected me to get better. And I think that's something that I latched on to. It was kind of that old adage of I didn't need to be as good as them. I just had to, try to be better than I was last week. And if I didn't do well, I wasn't letting anyone down except myself. It's like if I didn't do well, if I didn't practice or whatever, it's like, well, then it was just on me. I wasn't letting anyone else necessarily down. So I think that's what attracted me to it. And staying through it, I think again for me was maybe different from other people because I mean I like the idea that maybe I was learning how to. At the time, I thought I was learning how to defend myself, and I thought I was, learning how to fight. But for me, I think a lot of it too was sort of the psychological thing. It was the one thing that I just seemed to be to take to and get good at. So when I was, if I did do sports in gym or something that wasn't good, well, I had karate. I'm like, I know I'm pretty good at that. So to quote Dave Goggins, that was kind of my cookie jar. That's what I kind of went to when things didn't go well. I kind of pulled that out because I'm like, all right, I can't really hit a baseball that well, but like, I'm getting pretty good at pounding. So when I do Kentucky, I can, my arms are a lot tougher. So that was kind of thing I kind of fell back on. So it wasn't so much, I guess, the physical, the fighting aspect. It was more that how I incorporated that into my life of mentally of like, okay, when I face a challenge, this is helping me get through that challenge. And I think that was probably the biggest thing that stuck with me through most of my time studying. Because I fortunately never had to really fight anybody, which was good. But that, and funny, I don't know if I ever told this story, or if you ever heard this story from John, but I remember as a kid, John telling us working with us, and he said, "You know what kind of fighter scares me?" And you remember John? I'm like,
Yeah, I remember this.
and I mean, I was a kid. I'm like, "You're scared of somebody? Like you're a big tough black belt?" I was a kid. I'm like, "You're a big tough black belt. What are you scared of?" He's like, "You know what scares me is when you knock someone down, they keep getting back up. That kind of fighter. If he keeps getting back up, that's the kind of fighter you want to be. You just keep getting back up." And funny that story, and I tell that story to my kids too, because I'm like, that really stuck with me. So when times got tough, I always said to myself, like, you know what, I just need to get back up. That's always been my kind of my phrase: get back up, keep going, keep plugging along. So that part of it kind of is what carried me through a lot of my life. And it was one of those like when things would get tough, I would kind of fall back on that, like, you know what, I do Weichi. We get beat on and we just keep moving. So I mean that's what we do. We take shots, at least, like I say, now getting older, it's maybe not so great to take shots, but back then that was my mindset of like, hey, yeah, I can take this because I can do that. So that carried me through a lot of it. Honestly, the fighting aspect, it always intrigued me because I mean, I never, and I think everyone goes in like they want to be able to feel like they can kick someone's ass. So I think that was always sort of an underlying like, oh yeah, I want to be able to do that. But as I got older, like it was still there, but less and less so. I think it's more of that sort of like, like stick to itiveness. Like I need to just kind of stay in the fight. I need to just kind of keep grinding. I need to just keep getting better. That's what kind of kept me going, I think, year after year and all that. And then there were other things like there was that underlying kind of like, okay, it helped keep me healthy because I'd be like, I don't like to run necessarily, but I'm like, I would jog because it's like, well, I kind of have to because I need to be like in somewhat shape if I ever did have to, fight or I have to do push-ups because, I needed to train or whatever. So there's always that sort of underlying element of it too. So yeah, that's probably the biggest thing is why I stayed through it. It's not so much the physical, but sort of that mental sort of, to use a cliche, that mental toughness that can help me kind of get through stuff for the most part. And now that I'm older, I think that's still a big part of it. But I think again, that sort of underlying self-defense aspect, we were talking about this earlier, has changed a bit. Because I've gotten older and gotten exposed to other stuff. It's like, as tough as I might have thought I was, like I know, like, yeah, no, I'm not. So and realistically, like some guy out in the street is going to be, just it's going to be violent, it's going to be vicious, it's going to be quick. And your traditional sort of block punch, it's not happening. So you got to kind of be aware of that and know what to look for to avoid that. And like we said before, that's sort of my interest now. Is it sounds kind of deviant, but my interest is a little bit in sort of the studying of violence and how it comes about and how people learning how to spot it and then avoid it is really what it comes to. So I don't know, did I hit all the points of that question? I don't know.
I think it's a great answer.
Yeah.
I think, from the highest level, you talk about Budo and the highest level, Japanese concept of Budo. And I think just any well-adjusted person, you hit the highest level of like self-defense, know how to spot something before it's happening and avoid it, I mean, it gets down to as simple as that. I mean, once you're in the mix, there's too many variables that can happen and there's so much can go bad, even if you are the best quote unquote fighter in the world. And then there's always the legal ramifications afterwards. It's just it just gets nasty. So yeah, I think that's the highest level of martial arts. I remember, I don't know if you remember, there's a guy named Eddie Chepelis who used to teach at John's when we were kids.
Yeah.
And Eddie went to Okinawa. I remember he was in the Air Force and he, stayed in Okinawa and he trained there. And then, because he already was a black belt under John Zakastal, and Eddie stayed out there, and he stayed with the Weichi family, and he stayed with them, and he stayed with Kame, I think, Weichi, like the son that eventually took it over from, took over the Soke and the Weichi family. He lived there with those guys, and he came back, and I'll never forget what he said. He said, we were kids. He said, why do we study karate? And this, to learn how to fight. He goes, no, to learn how not to fight.
Right.
And that was the big deal, and that kind of resonated too. I remember John saying that story too about like the scariest fighter is the guy who keeps on getting up, and you knock him down, and you hit him over the head with an anvil, and he keeps on. He's like the Terminator.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, you train so you don't have to fight. So that's I think I think your answer was great.
And I think that's and that gets tossed around as, like I say, kind of a cliche in dojos, like, oh, you train not to fight. But I don't know if people really think about what that means, or really think about, like, okay, like people say, well, I don't want to fight, but I know how to fight. I want to know how to fight well. And it's like, okay. And I think for me, it was sort of eye-opening, and it took a long time to get there. And I think as a kid, like when I would think of fights, I think of that, like, okay, like, either you're squaring off in the parking lot or in, the baseball field, because, like, we got a beef or whatever, and it's going to be one-on-one, whatever. Or again, there might be some sort of honorable sort of, we'll call it match fight,
like a dualistic.
Yeah, like a duel. Yeah. And realistically, like if you're walking down the street of Boston, that's not how it's going to happen.
Not going down like that. No,
not going down like that. They're going to, smack you over the head before you even know what's going on.
Right. Exactly.
If you're not paying attention, and the best punch in the world isn't necessarily going to stop them. And I think too, that was what was kind of opening for me as far as learning how to fight, was doing some different things. Like when you had the boxing gym, and I started doing the boxing drills and stuff like that, and saw some of the boxers, when I look at it and go, okay, yeah, maybe I could kick them or something like that if they were coming at me, but I would look at those guys and they would kick my, I've been doing karate for a long time, but I'm like, those guys would probably like kick my ass if they really wanted to. And I think you just have to be open and realistic with that too in some instances. And I don't know if every martial artist is about that, if that makes sense. Yeah, I think some people look at it and be like, well, I'll just do this, right? And I'm like, try it.
I think that's the big fallacy in martial arts, where people aren't honest with themselves, and it's not so much of the art that they train in, it's how they train, and whether they're training with pressure or stress. And there's some things you just can't simulate, like like the random acts of violence. They're really tough to simulate, and I know there's been other groups of folk that have tried to incorporate that surprise function, and it's just very difficult. But that's why I always kind of go back, and I've had numerous conversations with Tim and others around the best way to deal with the psychological pressure is to physically face that pressure. You got to put it in a pressure cooker. That's why combat sport athletes, when push comes to shove, they're ready to throw, and they're not gonna, because they've been there, they've been exposed. Right. Guy who goes to a a dojo twice a week for an hour, does 15 minutes of warm-ups, moves their arms around, like a chicken, and thinks that this is a magical movement, tenses his body so he can crack walnuts in between his ass, and then he does a two-man drill that he looks like a goddamn robot. He'll get lit up by a kid who boxes and does some rounds for 3 months. He'll get lit up.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that guy doing it twice a week in the dojo for exercise, great.
Right.
Don't
Exactly.
fool, and don't fool yourself that, like, just because you're a professional fighter, and some guy jumps out behind you and hits you over the head with a blackjack, that, you're gonna, no.
Mm-hmm.
That's, random acts of violence are random acts of violence. So but you got to be honest on, I think, why you're training, and you have to, and your reasons can change, and they should change. Probably they should evolve they should evolve. Like anything, you should be growing,
I think I mean, Tim said exactly that. When he said there's all kinds of reasons to do martial arts. Some people do it for health, some people do it for, they just enjoy it or whatever. And I mean, like I say, for me, I enjoy the training aspect of it because I like how it helps me, like, not just mentally, but I think, like, now being older, it's like it's a good way to stay in shape. And again, it's that kind of thing that sparks me to, like, okay, maybe I should, like, jog or, like, at least walk or something, do something physical, because so I can stay in shape, so I can keep training. Like I say, you just got to kind of be honest with yourself as to what you're trying to get out of it. Like I say, I don't necessarily want to be the baddest fighter. I just want to either avoid or survive a situation if something happened. That's really, like, my end game. I don't need to be Bruce Lee or whatever. I'd rather just, like, oh, hey, there's a group of kids over there. It's like they look like they're rebel. I'm going to cross the street and go this way and maybe hang out in the coffee shop for a little bit and let them go by,
right.
Instead of trying to be like, Mr. Because
right. Yeah, I mean, I might have mentioned this before, but I used to take the T, the subway, and one night I was leaving the office. It was late, and there was these guys, and they were all revved up, and they were in the same car, and they were just looking for trouble. And so this next stop came. I was like, you know what? I got off. I walked down to another car, got in that car. It was like, you know what? I don't need this aggravation. Like, whatever. What are you gonna do? Beat up an old bald man? It's good for you. But I was like, I didn't want to just even deal with it. So
yeah.
I think people just need to be assessing why they train all the time, and it's okay to change, and it's okay to do something that's not popular, and don't try to kind of, one of my pet peeves is kind of square peg round hole, like, well, we do that too. No, you don't. So it's like, I'll never forget it. It was like, some idiot was saying, well, we have ground fighting too. I just lay on the floor and I do my kata. I was like, are you freaking kidding me? Is like, have you ever rolled with anybody in jits that actually knows what, I mean, like, sure, sure, if that makes you feel better, buddy, okay, but.
And it's like you said, I think sometimes people, like you're saying, like, they move their arms around, like there's magic in the movements. There's nothing magical. There are no secrets.
No.
It's funny saying that there are no secrets. The other story, which and again, you can ask my kids, I told them this story, is the story about Mr. You probably know which one I'm going to tell, Mr. Yanamini.
Yeah.
Right? So people don't know, right? Mr. Yanamini was probably like 50 years old. He was at some, he was in like seminar type thing, camp in New Hampshire, right? So long story short, this guy tried to break a board over his forearm, tried it 3 times, couldn't do it. So Mr. Yanamini, little Okinawan guy, comes out. He said something to the guy in Japanese. And again, I tell everyone, I don't know Japanese, but I swear he said to him something to the effect of, "You sissy, let me show you how it's done." he stood on one leg, held his foot, straight up, with his toes up. The guy swung the 2x4 with Mr. Yami's toes, and it broke right away. And I thought it was like super impressive that he could just hold his foot out there and break a 2x4 over his
It was
toe.
impressive.
Yeah. I was like, part of the most
I
impressive
don't want to
thing-
do it, but it was impressive.
like part of the most impressive thing I saw. So I remember like we saw him later and I was like, oh, Mr. Yami, that was like really impressive. And he's like, do you want to know the secret of kicking with your toes? Yeah. Just do this. And he starts kicking the floor with his toes. He goes, do this 100 times every day. Toes get strong. And I remember going like, that's not a secret. That's just friggin' work. I don't know. It's like,
Yeah.
let's just doing work over time, which, that's what it's like. There's no secret. It's like, you just got to do the work over time and you get better.
Right. Exactly.
So anyone that thinks there's some sort of magic into whatever, or into a toe kick, no, it's
right.
You got to kick with your toes 100 times every day, and that's it. Like I said, there's no magic in the block. There's, you just got to get out of the way and not get hit.
Exactly.
So,
the block's done with your feet. Don't be there.
Yeah.
Right. That's good. All right. I think this is a wrap.